Hey, what's going on? My name's Dmytriw. This is my 2008 Honda S2000 in Rio Yellow Pearl, and going to talk a little bit about what got me into cars. So as long as I can remember, I've always been into cars. I grew up in a family that's a car passionate family. As far as I can remember, I think my earliest memory of my dad was walking downstairs. I was born in Omaha, Nebraska, so we have basements. And walking downstairs in the basement and seeing my dad work on his Corvette Purple 1956 Chevy street rod. And I didn't have a choice. I was just born into it. It was always around me and always the thing. My uncles were really into cars as well, so spent, it seems like, most of our weekends and family events, instead of doing usual stuff like theme parks and stuff like that, we were always out doing car shows, which was great. Growing up around cars, my dad was always into vintage muscle cars and Mopars, Chevys, almost anything under the sun, as long as it was pre-72. Growing up, I just remember going to all the cars and car shows and like Good Guys and stuff like that, Mopar Nationals out in Columbus, Ohio, and always remembering that it was going to be a big part of my life, which is kind of cool because it kind of shaped how all the different types of cars that I'm into. I'd say what got me over into imports was, like most people, I actually remember seeing the first Fast and Furious in theaters, the very first one. And I remember the first time we saw it, right in the opening scene with the black Civics, the screen cut out. And so they gave us free tickets to go see it again, even though it only cut out for like a few minutes. And then we went and saw it again, of course, the next day. So seeing that and seeing the cars with the big wings always was something that I wanted to have. And I actually have to thank my brother too, because my brother kind of was the first to stray off from the muscle cars. And I remember when he was in high school, he had a 2001 Electron Blue Prelude, which I always loved that car. I remember riding in it when I was a kid and thinking how sweet it was. And of course playing Need for Speed Underground and Tokyo Extreme Racer on PlayStation, PlayStation 2, all that good stuff helped get me into Japanese cars. And I'd have to say that when I was started coming up, getting my license, of course, like right after I turned 16, I went and got my license because I knew I wanted to drive. But my first car was actually a Honda Element, which was a hand-me-down from my dad. But that only lasted like 6 months, and then due to circumstances, I actually was able to get that Electron Blue Prelude that my brother had in high school and drove through college, so I had a ton of awesome memories with. And that was definitely the first car that I fell in love with. And I drove it all through high school and even owned it after high school. And when I got it, it had teen coilovers on it and some custom made, actually had Boyd Coddington billet wheels that looked sick. They fit awesome. And throughout owning it through high school, went through a couple looks. I had BBS RSs on it. That was back when Hella Flush was really a thing, the Hella Flush blog. And stretch tires slammed. That was probably like 2007, I think. And I was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. And I remember, if you're from Atlanta, Georgia at that time, the big meet was the varsity meet, which was like the first Thursday of every month. I think it was, or something like that, first Saturday or something. But it was a big meet downtown, and it was like the big import meet. And all the sick cars were there. And I always remember like driving down there with all my buddies. A lot of my buddies had 240s in high school. I got 13s, S14s. They got me into the stretch tire stance, like, of course. And I remember going down there, and there was one car that always like stood out in my mind, and it was a Rio Yellow S2000. And that was actually back when forums were popular. And if you remember, that guy was S2KJ, which was like part of Premium Garage Crew, which was like, they had the dopest cars in Atlanta at the time. And being in high school, of course, everybody thought those cars were super sick. And so those guys had a lot of influence on me and how I started modding my cars. And after I graduated high school, I actually had the opportunity to get S2000. And this was 2009 when I got it. And back then, S2000s were pretty cheap because the economy was going through a crash. And so I was able to get my first S2000, which was actually a Rio Yellow S2000, just like this one. And had it for a while. I actually owned that car from 2009 to 2013. And at the time when I had it, you know, I was out of high school, I was working, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, so I was just working, and I was buying some parts for it. And then I started going to community college, and so of course, you know, the focus kind of shifts elsewhere. So I was going to school and I was modding it, I actually worked at Cabela's there to support my hobby, and I started buying parts for it. And I had on that one, it was just like a OEM AP2 lip. It had bronze VSXX on it, and NVIDIA Dual, which is like the loudest fucking exhaust ever. Talking about Drone City, but at the time I thought it was sick. And that car was actually in the first Wekfest in Texas, which the first Wekfest Texas was actually in Fort Worth, and my car was in that, and I thought it was a really big deal to be in that, so I was really excited and felt really cool. And I loved that car a lot and drove it as much as I could. It was my daily driver for 3 or 4 years, and then ended up I finished like my basics at school, and then ended up transferring to University of North Texas. And I knew I had to move, obviously, to go to school. And I didn't want to take the S2000, sitting outside, obviously, with soft top, high theft. Didn't want to be stressing about it at night. So I had the Prelude at the time too, but the Prelude was just kind of neglected. It was sitting in storage at my parents' house. So ended up, one of my brother's friends who had known the car for a long time, ended up buying it and shipping it back to Nebraska. And so I used that money and ended up buying a regular cab Silverado, which was my daily driver, and actually kind of started like taking first place. So I was at school, and the S2000 was just sitting in the garage, and I began to mod the regular cab Silverado, which if you have ever been to Texas, you know that trucks are a really popular thing there, and especially like lower trucks and regular cabs in general. So ended up doing, I think it started as a 4.6, but then ended up 5.7 and then 6.8 drop. So it was pretty slammed. Had factory Tahoe 20s on it, all color match. That truck was a blast, man. Super fun to drive, the short wheelbase but wide regular cab Silverado. And I had that, God, all through school, and actually after I graduated. And at this time, the S2000 was sitting in the garage and just kind of collecting dust. And at the time, I thought I had lost interest in it, and my dad being a big influence on me, I wanted to get into the classic car world for a little bit. So I actually ended up selling the S2000. I put it back to stock. It was just coilovers and wheels anyway, and exhaust, and put it back to stock and ended up selling that car, and that was in 2013. And then once that car was sold, I spent some time trying to figure out what kind of car I wanted to get next. And of course I had the regular cab Silverado at this time. And after spending some time, I really got into the traditional style hot rods, thanks to my dad, and ended up finding the body was a 26T coupe, chopped 6.5 inches, sorry. Had a 64 Impala wagon roof, custom 2x3 chassis, super, super cool car. Had a 327 built motor with tri-power out of a 67 Camaro. Real cool, super bare bones. Like when we actually bought it, it had bar stools instead of a seat. So obviously we took that out, put seats in it. Spent a lot of time finishing it out, getting it to run right. It was a traditional car, so it was just in primer, but had the big white walls on it. If you've never driven a car like that, it's the one way to describe it is extremely scary. Death wobble like crazy because of the solid front axle, but a lot of fun. Learned a lot about cars working on that thing with my dad and my brother. We got it to drive great, stop great, handle as good as you would expect a car on bias supplies to handle. But it was a lot of fun, and went to a lot of shows with that. There's a big show, Good Guys in Texas. They have one here too. That I won the Suede and Chrome Award, which was pretty cool. Had a lot of fun with it, and the only thing about it though is a car like that, you can't just jump in and drive it like you would something that's a little bit newer. So while it was fun to look at, it kind of was just getting older. But meanwhile, during this time, I'd still had the 26, but it was sitting in storage a lot. And I ended up getting a job where I was driving a lot, and I sold the regular cab Silverado, and I bought a new 5-liter Mustang right when they had announced the redesign in 2015. And I fell in love with that car and wanted to get one, so I actually ordered one. And I waited for like 6 months for this thing because they were having production problems on the new ones. And it was a performance pack car. So I had the Brembo brakes, the 373 rear end, of course, factory rear car. It was super cool. Ended up getting that, and I was driving that, and so I had the 26 Ford at the time, and then also the Mustang. And I ended up getting a job out of school where I was, it was kind of like outside sales, so I was putting a ton of miles on that car, and with long tube headers and the exhaust and the intake and being super loud and not really comfortable and lowered. And also the depreciation on those was crazy. So, and no, not only that, but it was in the service 3 times within 3 months for not having AC, which if you live in Texas and you understand how important air conditioning is. So I had enough with the car and ended up trading it on just a 4-door Silverado crew cab, 4-wheel drive. It's a good daily, and just level kit and big tires on that thing. And meanwhile, at the same time, I still had the 26 Ford. And so kindly, you know, I sold the Mustang, and back when I had that, I actually ended up getting the Mustang because a lot of my friends that had S2000s originally, as everything was changing in Texas, you know, highway racing, all that kind of stuff started getting really big. So everybody was selling their S2000s and buying Corvettes and Mustangs. And so I followed trend with my buddies and ended up getting a Mustang as well, and you know, had a lot of fun with it. A pretty quick car for what it was. Had the truck, and I had always known that in the back of my mind I didn't want to get a Z06 because the fastest guys out there and the nasty, you know, rolling through the meat with the big nasty cam always was super cool. So I ended up wanting a Corvette. Traded the Mustang in on a truck, ended up posting the 26 for sale online, and that car actually ended up getting sold to a guy in Finland, which was the craziest, easiest transaction ever. Just wired the money, they came and picked it up, put it on a container, and that car actually got seized in US Customs, which is crazy, and it was sitting in Finland in a US holding ground in an ice storm, which that car didn't have any windows. I mean, it was a 5 window, so it had a windshield, quarter windows, and a rear window, but it never had side windows in it. And so they were cool enough, the guys at the gate, to let the new owner go into the customs yard and put like a tarp around the windows and stuff to kind of protect it from the elements. But that car ended up there, and he actually ended up finishing that car, and he sent me some pictures. He painted it dark maroon, ended up being super cool. But anyway, so I had that car got sold, and then I began looking for another car because I just had the truck for the daily driver. And I ended up getting a 2002 Electron Blue C5 Z06. And that car was a blast. When I bought it, it had ported heads in it and a big cam, huge super nasty cam. It was like 612, 113 lobe separation angle, which is, it was gnarly. I mean, the whole thing would just shake at the light, super fun. But it had some issues with it. So I ended up, it had 410 gears in it when I bought it, and that gear was way too tall for the size of cam in it. So it had really, really bad cam surge and was difficult to drive at low speed. So ended up taking the whole rear end out, which in the Corvette, obviously the transmission and the rear end are attached in the back because it has a torque tube. And so while it was out, replaced the clutch in it because it had this clutch that was super overkill for the amount of power it was making. LS7 clutch, C6 Z06 shifter in it, and then ended up actually getting a stock rear end out of a Z06 that my buddy had with 342 gears. And after that, sent it to get retuned by 21st Century Muscle Cars. Car made 491 at the wheel NA, so good power for just being a heads cam C5, and super fun, super fun car. I owned that car for a long time, and had a lot of fun with it. Then after a while, I actually started a new job where I'm working right now, and ended up getting a transfer to Seattle, which is of course where I live now. And I knew that time was coming, so that car was tuned on 93, and it's not really a cruising around mountain course type of car. It's not really a corner car. It's more just getting on the highway and letting it roll from the 60. Of course, you know, drag radials all the time. But ended up selling it. I didn't want to bring it up here and have to have it retuned for 92 octane. And so I ended up posting it online. I only had a couple weeks to move to Seattle once I got my transfer, so I actually didn't sell the car before I moved here. And it was still for sale, sitting in my parents. My parents have an extra building at their house, so it was sitting in storage. And I sold my truck too, because I was getting a company car. I sold it, just took it to CarMax the day before I left. And the Vet was for sale for a little bit, and then a guy from Chicago actually came up and bought it. and flew into Texas and drove it back all the way to Chicago, which is crazy because that car was on drag radials, and he drove it across country on drag radials, but made it no problem. I think he said he had to stop a few times because of the rain. Obviously, drag radials and rain, it's like glass. But that car was gone, and he owned it for a while, and then I think he ended up selling it to get a Terminator Cobra or something. But anyway, when I moved here, I didn't have a car for a year, and so I spent a year thinking about what I wanted to get. I was living in an apartment at the time, and I didn't want to have a car at that time because I'm really OCD and I have really bad anxiety, so I don't want to think about my car like sitting out in a garage with other people walking around it. And also paint's a really big deal for me, so I didn't want to have a car that had nice paint and it would get dense, and because I just wouldn't be able to sleep at night. But I spent a year thinking about what kind of car I wanted to get, and obviously I'd had, you know, a couple Hondas, I had some muscle cars, even an old car at the time, and after spending a lot of time thinking about it, I just one day I was like, you know what, the one car I miss the most is that yellow S2000, and so I ended up deciding that I wanted to get back into another S2000. I didn't know at the time that I wanted to get a yellow one, so I knew that I wanted to have a car that had under 40K, 45,000 was my goal, as clean as possible, all stock, all VIN present, and of course nicest paint I could find, because that's a stickler for me. And so I spent, God, probably 2 to 3 or 4 months. It was a while, but I spent a lot of time looking at a lot of cars. I think I looked at like 6 or 7 different S2000s. I even drove down to Olympia to look at one, but I just couldn't find the car that I thought was my car. A lot of sellers, I'll put clean. You get there. I actually remember I looked at a Suzuki AP1 that the guy said, you know, he actually bought the car new and said it was like the cleanest car you'll ever find. I drove 2 hours to go see it, and I got there, and apparently cats had broken into his garage and had scratched the paint all down. So all the quarter panels on the car actually had scratches all down them. So, but he didn't think that was a big deal apparently, but passed on that one, of course. And then one night I was just looking around on S2KI. Actually, I hopped on there, reactivated my old account, and I saw this car sitting on there. And it actually happened to be local too. It was up in Bellingham. 2008, 2-owner car. I think the original owner, it was leased down in Arizona, and the guy said he had bought it from the Honda dealer down in Arizona, and that he had flown down and had it shipped back. And so I messaged him and said he's living up in Bellingham, he could meet. We agreed to a time to meet, and then went and checked it out. I drove the 2 hours up there, and I don't know, like, I got there and we met at the Honda dealer because he was an older guy, and he had it serviced there its whole life. It had 45,000 miles on it, so it was right at the limit of what I wanted. The car it was priced higher out of my budget, but he had dropped the price 2 times already, so I figured he was open to negotiation, and we ended up, I pulled into the lot, and I remember like it was yesterday, I pulled into the lot and I backed into the spot, and in my company car. And you can see the road like super far from where he was coming. And I remember seeing, you know, he was a giant guy. He had been like 6'6", so his head was sticking out of the top with the top down. But I remember seeing that yellow S2000 coming down the road, and I don't know, I just got super excited, and you know, I think it reminded me of my previous car. And right when I saw it, I knew that that was it. It was exactly as described, super, super nice. We jumped in it. I drove it for an hour. All down like Chuckanut Drive, if you're familiar with that area. Super awesome, and fell in love with it. And it was probably me being sentimental, you know, sitting in the same seat, seeing the yellow. And the weirdest thing about it was it's not my old car. My old car ended up in Florida, is actually still there, and it only has like, I think 35,000 miles on it. So basically whoever bought it from me had like, they never drove it. But I sat in this car, and it was so crazy because it ended up actually smelling like my old S2000. And I don't think S2000s have like one smell, because I've sat in a lot of S2000s, but it was weird. It smelled exactly like my old car. It was so creepy. I actually had to run the VIN because I was like, dude, this is my old car. It's got to be it. Same year, same everything. But it's not. But it was probably just me being sentimental, but I fell in love with the car, made a deal on the spot, and gave him a deposit, went back, got everything in line, and picked it up a week later. And the funniest thing about it was going to pick it up was, oh my God, it was so bad. So like the car's in Bellingham, and I was living in Issaquah, which is where I live now. And obviously, how do you get 2 hours away to get a car and then drive it back? So my girlfriend went with me, and we didn't want to have her drive it all the way back because the forecast was like a really bad storm. And so we ended up taking the train from Seattle up to Bellingham. And so we get on the train at like 6 in the morning. We Ubered to downtown, jumped on the train, and on the way up there, there was so much rain on the track that once we got past Marysville, the track had actually washed out. And so the train was stopped indefinitely. And they stopped us at this station, but I had no idea what time we were gonna get back. They were like, it's gonna be at least 4 hours. That's what they told us. So we're like, oh my God, there's no taxi in town. I mean, there's like a gas station in this town, there's nothing. I can't remember the name of the town, but it's just past Marysville. There's like nothing out there. And we were sitting there and, we were thinking about what to do. And there was like, I was trying to call the guy whose car was buying, but he doesn't text because he was like 70 something and I couldn't get a hold of him. And I know that he was meeting us at the train station at that time because you know what time that we were getting there. And so I started stressing out. I was like, oh my God, like what's going on? Like I can't get a hold of this guy, he's gonna leave and then I'm not gonna have a car, freaking out. But anyway, so long story short, we were calling, there was a taxi service in town and the guy had like one car, but he didn't answer. And somehow we got somebody, we were on Uber and Lyft, and we got somebody on Uber to come pick us up. But they actually drove all the way from Marysville. So they drove like 35 minutes just to come get us and then drive us up to Bellingham. And it was so funny because we actually, there was another couple that was sitting next to us on the train, and they were going to Vancouver to catch a cruise on their, for like a Alaska cruise or something. And so thankfully they ended up splitting the Uber with us because it was like a $240 Uber. It was crazy expensive. So thankfully they split that. And then we got there, a guy was there, signed over the title, and drove it home in the craziest rainstorm I've ever driven an S2000 in, which was a total bummer right when you first pick up your car, but it was just what I wanted. I knew it was gonna be rad. And so we went and picked it up and ended up going ahead and driving it all the way back. And after about a month or so, we ended up, you first get your car and you're always like, oh, I'm gonna leave it stock, I'm not gonna do anything. Well, that lasted like 2 weeks. And then like after 2 weeks, I ended up going ahead. It's a busy dead end road. Anyway, so, I said I was gonna leave the car stock, but that lasted about 2 weeks. And then first thing that I ended up doing to it was teen coilovers and OEM lip, and then I actually had a set of white T37s right away that I put on it. And then like the more I drove the car, I don't know, it felt like this was the car for me, and I think this is like a forever car. I've never had a car that I thought I was going to keep forever, but I think this is definitely one. To me, it's really cool because at the time I had this car, the first one anyway, there was a lot that I wanted to do to it, but due to other priorities in life, kind of had to hold off for a little bit and then ended up selling it. So this is kind of like my second go around with it, and I'm definitely super stoked on how it's turning out. After just wheels and coilovers, I ended up, I think it was at some point, yeah, so I still had the T37s and the OEM lib, HKS exhaust. I think I had a seat too, Cusco Bride. And I ended up finding a hardtop on S2KI, of course, which the guy had posted it for like a crazy price and then ended up dropping it. And it must have been like, I guess maybe because nobody uses S2KI anymore. I just messaged him and got his phone number and I shot him an offer, and the hardtop had some dents in it, so that's probably why I got it for a pretty good deal. But I ended up driving up to Arlington to go purchase the hardtop and met the guy, super nice guy. It was off a Spa Yellow AP1, and we actually ended up just swapping the hardware in his driveway, which was super cool. I never owned an OEM hardtop before, so we ended up swapping the hardware in his driveway from his car right into mine right next to it. And when I was driving back from picking up that hardtop, I actually somebody saw me driving, I guess, and posted a picture of my car on the local Facebook group. And that's how I actually got hooked up with a lot of the guys now that I know in the S2000 community. And when I lived in Texas and had my first S2000, That's actually how I met a lot of my buddies there, was through having that S2000. And I thought we had a pretty good group there, but definitely being in Seattle, this is the best S2000 group in the country, in my opinion. And I met a lot of really awesome people through having this car, and I'm really grateful for that. Because of that car, that's probably why I like it so much too, and like living here is because of having this car. It just made Seattle in general such an enjoyable experience for me to live, and having a lot of fun while I'm here. But back to the car. After getting the hardtop, because it was spa yellow, I ended up having it wrapped, obviously black. Picked up a CR lip through the community. Really changed the car to me. Actually, I got the CR lip first and then wrapped the hardtop black, and kind of gave it like that pseudo CR vibe, I guess. Ended up doing the brakes. I ended up buying those wheels, actually, the bronze CEs from Kruger over in Japan, and got a pretty good deal on them. Great sizing. I got the wheels before I got the spoon brakes because I knew that I wanted to get a big brake kit eventually, and so the specs on them are perfect for having a big brake kit. And then slowly over time, added the wing and other various parts. But the car's been a blast. It's definitely not done. I know the aero is in the future for the car, and that's definitely going to be what's down the road. But as it comes, one at a time. To me, less is more. I always think buying authentic and doing it the right way is the way to go. So I'm excited to see what the car has in the future, and we'll just take it one part at a time. So if you ask me what my build philosophy would be on, modding your car, or if it's your first car that you're going to do it, definitely to me the biggest thing is do it right, take your time, and build it authentic. To me, there's nothing better than seeing a car that only has a few parts on it, but everything is done correctly. Have the vision in mind that you want to. So to me, a personal hobby, I guess that's related to cars, is I collect Hyper-Rev magazines. And so I spend a ton of time looking up reference points on how I want to build my car, and always keep it in your head. And to me, you have to buy parts. Obviously being in a great community, it's really easy to pick up good stuff locally. So just do it in that way. Wait for the right part to come along. Don't get patient. It takes a long time to build a car right the way you want to do it, and defend authenticity for sure.